hostess, Lovely. Today I have the privilege to engage with the one and only Morgan Lee.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Hello, Miss Lee. So nice to meet you.
It's awesome to be here, love. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
My pleasure.
So tell me about yourself.
Well, let's see. I used to live in New York City. I was here, actually, I thought about it, and I was here 10 years ago, which is kind of insane. I have lived in Hawaii for the past 2 years, which has been awesome. Have you ever been to Hawaii?
No, but I want to go.
What do you know about Hawaii?
Well, I like the movie Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah, did you also see Moana too?
Yeah, I love Moana.
Okay, you probably know tons about it. Just kidding. You should definitely come. It's great. It's actually where my family is from. My dad grew up there and he's part Hawaiian, and so I have family that goes really far back there. But I moved to Hawaii after spending 6.5 years in Chicago, and that's where I really started pursuing my career as a journalist.
Oh, so you're a journalist now.
I'm a journalist now.
Cool. When did you realize that you wanted to be a podcaster, and what steps did you have to take?
So I was fortunate enough to be at my company right around the time that we were starting podcasts. In fact, my boss was the person that they said, hey, you're going to be the one that's going to start podcasts for our company. And then he looked at me and he was like, do you want to be the host of one of these shows? And so it's something that I have been doing for around 6 years. I am the host of a show that we call Quick to Listen. It is a news podcast, and so essentially at the beginning of the week, my co-host and I will chat with each other and say, like, what's the big news story? What's happening right now? And then we're going to say, like, who would be a person who could speak really eloquently and thoughtfully on this particular topic? Because as you know, current events make people go crazy, right? You know, people have really strong opinions about the news, and our goal is to find someone who can bring clarity and wisdom and common sense and information about something. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, right? Like, I always want people to have good resources about what's happening in their lives and so forth. So that's been really great to be able to do that.
So you're all about the positive stuff.
Not all about the positive, but all about what I would say nuance. So helping people understand things better, right? Like, that's like kind of the goal of the show, is that like everything you see in the news doesn't always make sense to people, and people tend to get really mad. I'm sure you've seen people, think about like elections or COVID, and people get like really angry, right? Like, whether it's, should we wear masks or not? Who should we vote for? You just had an election here in New York, and people were like, I really support this new mayor, and some people were like, who's that? Like, it's really divisive. And so we want to give people information they need so they don't have to feel as angry and worked up about it.
Oh, okay. I get it now. What was your experience been like working in Christianity today?
So I feel really fortunate because I've gotten to do so many different things. So I've obviously just talked to you about podcasting and how that was something that I got to try. I have also been in charge of our social media at various times. And so whether it's working on Twitter or working on Facebook to figure out how to connect with our readers who exist on there. And then more recently, I'm actually in charge of a lot of the stuff that we do globally. So I mentioned to you that we cover Christians in the US, but we also cover Christians around the world. And there's plenty of people around the world that speak English, but there's plenty of people that don't speak English as well, right? And so over the past 10 years, we have 10 years. Wow, it hasn't been 10 years yet. Over the past 2 years, we've really grown the number of languages that we have stuff in. So we now publish articles in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Russian, in Ukrainian, in Chinese. Yeah, there's more languages than that, but that's been something that's been really exciting. So basically every day I work with people in other countries. So today I was texting someone in Brazil, I was texting someone in Belgium, and texting someone in Indonesia, which is cool.
Wow.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really awesome. So I really appreciate that part of my job. I speak Spanish, and so I always am trying to get the Spanish team to talk to me more in Spanish. I can practice my Spanish with them. I was also editing an article today that was originally written in French. I was editing the English one. I don't feel like my French skills are strong enough to like actually edit, good writing in French, but it's cool because we can communicate in French sometimes.
Yeah. And so you've traveled have you traveled all over to these places?
I've traveled to some of them. So for my job, one of the things that happened is, like, you can imagine before the pandemic, it was easier to travel to some of these places. So in 2019, I went to a conference with people from all over the world that were in South Africa. And then one of the things that's been really important at our job more recently is we're trying to like grow globally, is particularly in Asia. So back in 2019, I went to Indonesia and Singapore, where we met with leaders there to talk about like what would it look like to bring Christianity today to your context, which has been really cool. And then last year I went to another meeting in Ecuador too with people from all over the world.
That's amazing.
It's been cool.
If you were to turn back time and talk to your 8-year-old self, what would you say?
That's a great question. I think I would say get a passport as soon as you can. I don't think I got a passport until maybe I was at the end of high school. I went to Mexico to do a service trip there, and I think that's why I got it. I'm trying to remember why I got a passport. But once you have your passport, you're really able to go different places and travel different places, right? It's just like you've cleared out one element of paperwork that you need, and you can go ahead and do that stuff.
So you love traveling?
I love traveling. Do you love traveling?
Yes.
Have you been to a different country?
Yeah.
Which ones?
I've been to Jamaica, Turks and Caicos, Bahamas.
Okay. So you already have a passport then?
Yes.
Do you know how old you were when you got it?
Yeah, I was like around maybe 8 months old.
All right, well, I'm glad that you don't need that advice for your younger self. Your parents were on it.
Yes. What is your most notable achievement and why?
My most notable achievement. So I won an award last year for a podcast I made during the pandemic. It was called Prayer Amid Pandemic. And I made it because at the beginning of the pandemic, / at various other times, but at the beginning of the pandemic, right, you probably remember a lot of people were really stressing out. I was stressing out. It was a really like dark and scary time. People were living in lockdown, right, where you like just couldn't see people. I'm sure you remember like one day you were at school, the next day you hadn't seen you weren't going to see your friends for years afterwards. But pandemics are not new, right? Like throughout human history, there's been a lot of times where people have gotten really sick, and actually, tons of people have died. It's really sad. And so I was like, okay, what Christians have lived at other times in history where they've actually experienced living through a pandemic themselves? And so the podcast began where we would share the story of of a Christian that had lived there. I would bring in like a historian to talk about them. And then I would give some pandemic news from around the world, because one of the cool things that happened, that's not maybe the right word, but one of the interesting things about the pandemic, right, was it was experienced globally. So I was sharing news about how people around the world were experiencing the pandemic, different Christians were experiencing it. And then I invited someone from a different part of the world to close in prayer that week. And so we made 15 of those podcasts. They came out, I would say, like the first 3 months after the pandemic started. And we won an award for one of them. So that was really exciting.
That's cool. Did the person that was from a different country, did they speak another language?
So one of my personal regrets is that they only prayed in English. The podcast was in English, so it's obviously makes sense that person would pray in English, but I wish I'd had them do prayers in both the language that they had spoken in, whether it was German or Russian or some of the other languages, and then I wish them had to pray in English afterwards.
Oh, and what country were they from?
So because we did 15 different podcasts, we had 15 different countries represented.
Oh.
So that was also a really cool thing too, as you can imagine, to be able to just like hear Christians from around the world praying for something about this that we're all going through at the same time.
Were all of them bilingual, or they just speak English?
I think all of them were bilingual. Yeah. That's the thing about English, right? A lot of people around the world speak English. So that is something that has worked to help us out as we build different partnerships and relationships with people. And it's especially, as you can imagine, important on podcasts because it's a little harder to translate when people don't speak in the language that you're trying to do the podcast in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing you learned in life?
The most important thing that I've learned in life, I would say the most important thing that I've learned is how to make friends. Yeah. I think that my friendships with people are like the most important thing that I have in life. They are people who not only allow me to travel the world, right? Like when I go around the world, I often like see people that I know, or I'm visiting, or I'm interacting with them, I'm connecting with them. But they also have like changed my perspective on so many things and helped me grow and learn new things. And so, yeah, I think that making friends is something that oftentimes we hope is just going to come naturally. Like it's going to be really easy to make friends. But I'm sure even in your life when you've at school, you've sometimes been experiencing like it's going to be hard to make friends too, right? Like, I'm sure, was it weird at all coming back after the pandemic?
Yes.
Were people weird and awkward?
No.
No, they weren't? Okay, they were for some places. Yesterday I hung out with one of my friends here, and she was like, it's so weird going out now. I don't know how to interact with other people, you know? So it can be very challenging for people sometimes to like learn how to connect with people after that. But I feel like I've been fortunate to be able to place to where I'm like innately curious about other people. I like to ask people questions. I like to get to know people better, and I really like connecting with people.
So you're social.
Yeah, are you social?
Yes. What is the best piece of advice that you received?
The best piece of advice that I ever received. So definitely cannot answer that off the top of my head, but I recently heard this kind of piece of advice from my coworker, and I'm going to see if I can say it correctly. She said, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're basically saying, like, if you were to do something with excellence, you do everything else you do with excellence.
Or if you do something poorly, if you're just thinking, I'm just gonna like not try just as hard on this, chances are you probably do that in other areas of your life. Or if you're a really, unfriendly, unkind, rude person in this area, probably it's that way. I think sometimes we like to think of like, I'll bring my specific skill set, I'll really rise to the challenge here, but if you haven't been for what you were saying, like pursuing excellence in other areas, then it's going to be really hard to pursue excellence in this other area because of this idea of like, we're not actually compartmentalizing in our life. Like our life philosophies kind of like affect everything that we're doing. If you're messy at home, you're probably messy at work. I don't know, if you laugh a lot here, you probably laugh a lot there. Anyway, it was just like good food for thought, because again, I think sometimes we're just like, I only act this way in one area, and I think you probably even heard of this like in a church setting too before, where people might think like, I have my church self and then I have my outside of church self, but like all of those things affect each other, and you can't just think that like they're compartmentalized.
Got it. What challenges and obstacles did you have to overcome, if any?
Great question. Do you mean career-wise or personal life-wise? What are you interested in?
Maybe both.
So career-wise, I think that one of the challenges is just that journalism is a very tough industry when it comes to the number of jobs that are available to it. Journalism, like the number of journalists that exists has declined a lot in the past 20 years. Do you get a newspaper at your house? Do you get any magazines at your house? You're part of the problem. No. Right, but people get their information in different ways than they did 20 years ago, right? I mean, the internet has really changed how people find out about what's going on. We were talking earlier about this really terrible shooting that happened in Brooklyn this morning, and chances are, like, the paper that was produced yesterday has come out today and has no information about that, right? Mm-hmm. Where are people looking for that information? The internet, right? And sometimes people are paying, those websites that are out there for information, but a lot of times we're used to getting news for free. And we're looking for something that's super instant that can tell us exactly what's going on. But that makes it more challenging for the news industry to make the money that it was making beforehand. So what has happened is they've like laid off a lot of people. They've ended a lot of jobs. Magazines, newspapers have closed, or they've merged with other ones. So that is a particular challenge where there's just like not as many jobs available.
Well, like the store I go to in the morning to get like my snack or whatever, they get newspapers there, and then a guy, he comes and like buys one of them.
Yeah?
From there, yeah.
Have you ever read like an actual physical copy of a newspaper?
Well, I read a newspaper when my mom was in it about the New York Department of Education.
Okay. Right, but you read it because you had like a special connection, right? It's not like you're getting the newspaper delivered to your house.
Oh no.
Yeah, right. So it's just changing in terms of like how the media works and so forth. So yeah, I didn't study journalism in college, although I did do things connected to journalism. and so forth. And I did a leadership program here in New York the first year after I graduated, and then I decided I was going to work in journalism, but yeah, didn't get paid that well. And yeah, you have to take some chances when it comes to this stuff.
Interesting. Where do you draw your inspiration from?
I draw inspiration from listening to other podcasts and from reading different articles that people are doing, but I would say the number one thing is just talking to other journalists. Like, it's really fun when you hear from other people who do the same work that you do. You probably felt this before. You do lots of different roles, and you see how excited they are and how into what they're doing they are. I also feel really strongly too about telling different stories and, you know, educating people about stuff. I mean, I know for my podcast, Quick to Listen, the news podcast that I talked about earlier, there are times where after we're done recording, I'm like, yes, I feel like we've got a really good guest, and this guest is really going to encourage people, educate people, and I can't wait for it to come out. And then we would get like listener emails and be like really excited about that. So I do think some of it is the work itself, but also it never hurts to actually chat with other people and hear what they're doing, and then you get excited about those ideas.
The podcast Quick to Listen, do you still do that, or do you...
Right now it's on hiatus. The podcast ran for 5.5 years, and we basically didn't change the format at all. So that's okay, but also most things after 5.5 years need some sort of refresh. So that's what they're working on right now.
Oh, so now you're doing Christianity Today.
So Christianity Today is the name of the larger news organization that I work with, and then Quick to Listen is one of the Christianity Today podcasts. One thing, who knows if this will happen, but I just talked to someone last week actually, and their company or their Christian ministry, they work with people basically to do radio shows all around the world, which I think is really interesting work. And their Ukraine office has 30 people in it. So I was talking to this guy, and I was thinking to myself, like, man, it'd be really interesting if we could work with some of their Ukrainian journalists, right? Like, there's 30 of them, and get their voices into a podcast with them. So I like messaged the person in charge of podcasts. I was like, what do you think about this? So we'll see what he says. But it would be really, you know, it's a huge story right now. It's the war that's happening over there, and I'd really like to make something about that.
Hopefully you get him.
Thank you.
My main goal for hosting the Spreading the Love vodcast is to inspire and to inform the youth about endless possibilities. What advice would you give my peers and me as we pursue our dreams?
I definitely think that talking to people about their jobs is a great place to start, because when I was in college, to not even, I think you're in elementary school, when I was in college, I was still trying to understand what type of jobs people had, and I just was like, what do people do at work? What does a job actually entail, right? Like, some of the reasons why when you're little, you'd think, oh, you would be a firefighter or a doctor is because you can actually conceptualize it. But some of these jobs that people have, like, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I do think talking to people about their jobs is really great. I also think that it's really cool to see people like you that have this type of initiative to try things when they are still in school. I do think that social media gives people a chance to experiment more, right? Try things that they might, you know, previously have had to wait till they were in college to try. Now there's all these tools that are available right now. And it's really fun to like just learn how to work with your friends and work with different people on those projects. So, yeah.
Do you have any questions for me?
So, when you interview people, do you find it scary? Do you enjoy it? What type of things are going through your head?
Well, I enjoy it because I get to like know like actually like their perspective of their story instead of like looking on Google, because sometimes Google's not real. So I wanted to hear their perspective of things and what they do.
Who would you like to interview? Who's your dream interview?
Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah?
Yes.
Have you seen her interviewed before?
Yes.
Who's
She's
it?
really good.
No, I know, but she's interviewed people, but have you seen her interview, like, have you seen someone interview her?
No.
I haven't either. I think that would be really interesting. What do you think makes her a good interviewer?
Well, she has a lot about her life, and most people don't know because she interviews people. People interview her. So I would like to interview her and see how she lives her life.
Right on. Do you think interviewing is something you're going to do throughout your life, or you see it just being something that you do in this season?
I think it's going to be not through my life, but like I'm going to do it every so often.
Okay.
Because when I grow up, I want to be a pediatrician.
Okay. Do you think that you would be like interviewing kids? You know, I mean, a different type of skill, right? To learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching. As always, make sure you like, comment, and share. And peace, y'all.